So we will now let Mia and Christian host this ending conversation where we will grill our panel on science in fiction.
Thank you, Anna. It's a real pleasure to cap this off with some questions to this delightful group. So one question that kind of came up already, but maybe we can dig in a little deeper, is how important it is to get science actually correct. Does it matter for the narratives? There was a discussion about the movie The Imitation Game, which tells the story of Alan Turing, who was a mathematician and a coding expert, of course, during the war, and whether it actually depicted how he and his colleague worked with breaking the German codes during the war, and that was controversial. Does it matter, or is it okay to use science as a prop, whichever way you do it? And somebody would like to start?
I think I can see answer yes or no depending on the story. I mean, David took an example with Star Trek, and then you create a universe with its absolutely own play rules or set of rules, and the fact in a way stays within the arena. And another example of where I think that is extremely important is if you were to make like the medical series House. I would say definitely that you both are very very much inspired of the reality, as well as getting the facts right. But I think it's always is important to make the research. I think you always need to know when we lie and why. Yeah.
Anybody else want to chip in on this?
Well, in my stories, the science always have to be correct. That's the basics of my story. So I can't really comment on.
How do you feel if you, since you are a trained physicist yourself, you see incorrect science on television? Does that bother you, or are you fine with just going along because it builds a storyline?
Well, I pretend it bothers me because it's basically a really good thing to talk to people about, and makes good stories for me to write in the newspaper. So
it's good for the business, yeah. David?
Well, of course, it's when you hear wrong science, it's jarring. But on the other hand, I think about when I was growing up, me and my friends who were science-oriented, we liked to pick apart and laugh at, the original Battlestar Galactica in some cases, or Space 1999, little errors. And so, you might argue that it's important to have wrong science so you can give the kids something to talk about and get interested.
Thank you. Yeah.
But I think that the Big Bang Theory in particular has made, as also you commented, a huge improvement in how we perceive science, and science doesn't have to be boring anymore. And also on internet you can find a lot of amateur movies that are very funny and scientifically correct. But I'm thinking if there's any risk in this merge, not for the fiction but for the science, and we are talking a lot about resistance to facts, that people they pick and choose what they want to believe in. And how if something is funny, how do you know that it's science? If people go out on the internet and they see the clips for the Big Bang Theory, and then they see some clips saying that homeopathy is a great way to treat your cancer, will we lose anything by making science more fictional?
I hope people aren't getting their science facts from sitcoms. But I think you maybe give the audience credit for knowing when something sounds right or wrong, even if they don't know the science. It might, I think if it's wrong, it might sound wrong, just from your experience living your life.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I think that the audience today are highly educated in how we tell a story, and the agreement between the arena and the characters and me is that the fact sort of stays in that agreement. So no, I wouldn't say that.
There's no risk of making science more similar to fiction.
No.
No. Good. I like it. And then, but then, Because one of your examples you gave when you did the vitamin D story, and all the feedback that you got was on that you mislabeled the ALF.
Yes.
Is this? Don't you take the attention from what you really want to say?
Well, yes. In that case, maybe my scientific, the science in that story wasn't really very serious. But of course, it's always the details that I get comments on, and that so I have to get them right so people can read.
So as long as it's right, it's good. Yeah.
Well, so one question that comes up is when you work with science, either in fictionalized form or when you write about it for the general public, are there certain fields that are easier to communicate and some fields that are tricky? Don't let your answer be influenced by the fact that there are two neuroscientists asking you now, so you don't have to. Although we would love to hear that that's your favorite subject. But are there some that are more challenging, you find, and are those perhaps the ones you should be taking on more?
Well, for me, I mean, I know particle physics and those things better. And I gave a similar sort of talk about what I do at the American Physical Society, but not my normal meeting. I went to the other meeting the other month, which was filled with condensed matter physicists. And I kept getting asked, why isn't there more condensed matter physics in there? And it probably had to do with partly my comfort zone and also then who the characters became because of what the first few choices that we made were. On the other hand, there's a lot of superfluid helium now, so they can be happy.
Well, the hardest subject of all to write about is mathematics. So I'm very happy when there is a story about mathematics that I can write, because I love to write about mathematics, but it's so seldom I can do it because it's, almost always far beyond anything I can understand and anything anyone outside the field of mathematics can understand. So if there is an easy mathematics story, I will definitely write about it. But I love to write about all subjects. I love to mix. I don't want to write about the same thing all the time. We want to cover most of science.
I was thinking also, the fictional aspects we've been talking about here, David, you've been involved in a comedy, and Real Humans is a drama. I mean, perhaps with comedic aspects, of course. But is that different in how you approach the science, or is science more better for one of these formats?
I would say before getting to know Big Bang Theory, I would say probably more easier to have science in drama or crime, but I think that Big Bang Theory really has proved that you definitely can make comedy out of something that is maybe perceived by audience being a bit boring, but it definitely is not. So no, I can't see any problems with either or here.
I mean, I think we in the laboratory, we see comedic situations arise all the time. So that's one of the things that we've so enjoyed the show, that we see that this could be good for television, and you've proven that it could actually be that.
What about stereotypes? How are you thinking about this? The Big Bang Theory is a little bit using the stereotypes to drive the comedy, but I think the science is never stereotyped in the Big Bang Theory. But it's very easy to fall into these stereotypic portraits of scientists and also of science.
Well, early on, people said, well, these characters are going to be stereotypes or are stereotypes of scientists. And that was early on. And there's a mathematical reason why early on you might think the characters were not deep. Where stereotype just means, I think, that you're not making a fully fledged person. But if you only watched 3 episodes, or have only made 3 episodes that are 22 minutes long, which includes story and some jokes, and you're spreading that over 5 or 6 characters, you've only had a few minutes to explore each character. So if you only watch 3 episodes, they may not seem very deep. But now there's been 207 episodes. It's a lot more time than any movie that you watch. And so these characters definitely have likes and dislikes. They're individuals. I'm actually amazed, I think, because the writers come in and talk about and think about these characters all day. And what drives, they tell me, I don't do any writing, they tell me what drives the story is they make a situation and say, what would Sheldon do? What would Leonard do? Is really how it's what they tell me, how they think about it. So these characters are so well defined now, just little looks can be funny now if you've been following it. And what amazes me is that the writers probably know these characters better than members of their own family.
I mean, that's one of the things that struck me when I started watching the show, because I was first, oh, it's science, I'll watch it, it'll be fun. And I enjoyed it for the jokes. And then the Sheldon character was just annoying to me in the beginning. Like, he was funny, but he was annoying. Because I work with these people all day. But, no, and I am one.
Everyone
and I am one. But then it really, after a while, I see, like, this is a very complex character. Like, he has, I mean, that type of personality, which, you know, you could give it a diagnosis if you wanted to, or you could just say that this is a way of being. Like, that is an incredibly perceptive of how Jim Parsons has built that character, and he comes across as actually very, it's very affecting to me after a while. That's something that I've been very impressed by the show.
So first of all, you said you know a lot of people like Sheldon. We've noticed that everyone says they know Sheldon, but no one says they are. So you can do the math on that one.
Never met. I have no idea who this person is.
I don't want to dominate the discussion, but there was like a really interesting, relative to the stereotype, what you just brought up, it reminded me of, I kept thinking, well, some point they're going to have a sports discussion, and the stereotype would be Sheldon wouldn't know anything about sports, because the type of person you might think he is. But then you realize he loves rules. And he's from Texas. And what the writers came up with is, in fact, he knows everything about football. Right. And that actually was truer to the character than what you might have thought.
And I understood, I read a little about this, that he was not meant to have this big role in the show, but then Jim Parsons came in and did such a good job, or is that something I just picked up on somewhere?
I
he
am a
developed
viewer like you, so I would not be able to... From the very first pilot, there was this buddy comedy going on. So that would be a little surprising to me, but I'm really, like I said, I have nothing to do with the character development or this plot outline, so I can't really answer that definitively.
I think that this question is really touching to why success. Because, I mean, you can use, and they definitely use the stereotype as an invitation. You probably think you know how a scientist are, and that gets you hooked or interested. But you need quite fast from that move deeper into the characters, and that is definitely the fact of the show, that you want to hang out with these characters, and in the end it doesn't really matter that they are scientists, because they are four very, very interesting characters.
Mm-hmm. So there was actually a question from the audience earlier as well about how do we share the responsibility of bringing science out to the society? And I guess if that's what we think that we want to do, because you invited us to be more specific and tell more details, and I think it's a very good advice. And I think sometimes also when journalists call you, they are actually not open. I mean, they want to have the answer. They think you're a scientist and therefore you should know the answer, and the story behind is not relevant.
Well, for most news stories, it isn't relevant. But for the kind of, because if you just write an ordinary news article, then we just want the answers. Mm. But when we can write longer stories, like the ones I write every Sunday, then the details makes the stories much better. Mm.
For me, I think it's a very important aspect that there is always a background to the truth. You cannot say this is how it is. This is how it is when you do science, when you take this and this and this into account. So I think it's a very good advice. Is this something that you...
I'm not sure that I really follow the question.
So the question is, the comment was here, how can you work together with scientists to make the science more deeper or more varied, I guess?
I think that, as I said in my presentation, I think that we definitely can prosper from each other. Maybe our line of work is to make stories accessible for people who doesn't have that level of knowledge or understanding of issues and challenges when it comes to science. And our mission is about making relevant stories, fictionary stories, and I think that in that sense, science is a good place to start, because I think that you will always address things that matter to people.
And vice versa, because you've been doing this fictionalization now for many years. Has this changed your way of thinking about your science?
Has the working on the show changed the way I think about my science? Well, I think what happens is, a lot of times they ask me questions I don't know the answer to. I actually would like people to think I know everything off the tip of my tongue that they talk about, but it does take a little bit of research. And then what's kind of funny is that then, as a physics professor, we should be broad. It's very easy to get into your own narrow research and be because we're so busy. But it's been nice because now I have a little bit of a wider knowledge base just based on questions that have been asked to me. And sometimes now with students or with other professors, a topic will come up and I'll have some knowledge. I usually won't reveal why I have this knowledge.
So it's still a little bit that the fiction is not... because Maria, you said that the scientists are much better talking with science, and before we were talking with journalists, and 15 years ago it was considered bad to work with popular science. But so what you just said is actually still reflecting that it's not good to learn something from journalists.
I mean, and building on that a little, because we've been talking about how you can bring science into fiction. Now, we as scientists are today, I think, also feeling a pressure that, we have to pitch ourselves all the time. We have to get grants, we have to get money. So we have to sometimes, it's almost a pressure to fictionalize ourselves. I remember when I was going for an interview for a big grant, and we had a professional media consultant who was helping us, and he gave a lot of good advice. But then I showed my presentation, and one of them had an actual data point there, which is a squiggly trace of, we do recordings of how neurons act in the brain. And, I think it's the most beautiful thing in the world to look at, but I do realize there's no symmetry in it. And he said, that thing you're showing, wouldn't it be better if you just showed, a schematized version of that? And I looked at him in horror, you say I should not show my actual data and I should make up data. He's like, well, that would be one way of communicating. And I feel, that's, and I was like, yeah, that would also be one way to assure that I never, ever get that money. So there's a bit of a, we do feel that pressure, however, that we have to package our science. Now, do you see a problem in that, or is that something that we can, figure out what is the constructive way to go abroad, to go ahead and make it our science available to people without compromising on scientific integrity?
I don't have a very good answer. I see it as a problem, but I don't know. I don't know how to solve it. But I don't think it's your. Well, I think it's my job to make it a story, not your job. But I mean, I don't have influence over the grants, so. Or maybe I have.
You
maybe,
do.
Yeah, maybe I do. Yeah.
But not directly. Yeah.
Well, I still apply for grants and I sit on panels reviewing grants, and I can assure you, in these week-long meetings in these windowless hotel conference rooms, and I can assure you they're just as boring as they've always been. When scientists get together, we really do speak as scientists.
Yeah. Is there any input on that?
I mean, just the reflection is that, I mean, everything today, or a lot, is about storytelling. It's a very trendy word used all over really. And so that's what I come to think of when you are in that kind of situation, and financing in the future will maybe be by people that maybe are not understanding science at all. So of course you're going to need to to tell a story, to make them understand why it is important. So,
And in a sense, I don't think this, this is not all bad. Every time we write a research paper, and every one of us is super specialists in our field, and you don't have to go that far to encounter someone who doesn't know all the details. So when we write a paper, I see that it is our responsibility to make a very complex data set digestible and understandable, but not sacrificing anything in terms of the problems with the science and how it came about, etc. So it is a challenge that we are daily, but sometimes we are being pushed to perhaps take a bigger leap than we would like to.
I remember when I did my postdoc in the US, because Americans are much better at storytelling, also the scientists. So when you go to meetings, you usually get the story. And in the first years, it was fantastic. I was so impressed by all this good science being done. And then after 3 years, I think there was an Italian professor who came, spoke very broken English, and he put up one of these old traditional slides, blue, white numbers, and it was just numbers all over the. And I was like, this is such a relief to see the data. So I guess it's. I think it's a great. It's good to be able to tell a story, but as you say, we have to keep the facts in there as well.
Well, I think with that, we really want to thank you for your participation in that, and I'm going to hand over the microphone to Anna.